So pretty much all other grinders on shelf are plastic, which means that you grind plastic into your food and then you throw it away and you go buy another one and you grind more plastic. So currently it has a refill, reuse, real value sticker on the top. That's going to change to refill, not landfill. And on my flight this morning, I did a calculation of how many bottles and grinder heads we saved from landfill last year. 1,216,000 bottles and heads. It didn't end up in landfill.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Boardroom Conversations, the What Prop Business podcast. Today we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Cape Town. Her name is Samantha Skyring and she's the founder and CEO of Oryx Desert Salt. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We hope you enjoy it. Just a quick one, before this episode begins, please like, share and subscribe. We're on YouTube and Spotify. Please follow us to keep up to date with the latest episodes. Samantha, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to come and film this episode with me and to come into the Boardroom Conversation. I really appreciate your time today.
And I really appreciate the offer to come and share some of my story. Thank you.
So just behind, obviously we have Oryx Desert Salt and everyone knows the brand and it's an amazing story, but behind the business itself is always a person, and there's a personal story that's ultimately behind a brand and that's ultimately built up the brand over time. But so let's go back to the beginning and kind of what ultimately gave birth to your insights and your entrepreneurial spirit when you were younger that kind of gave you the platform to ultimately start Oryx Desert Salt later on in life.
So what I realize now, we were talking earlier about retrospect, is that so often there's a crisis in life that ends up being an incredible blessing. So initially it was my dad's financial crash when I was 13. And so I wasn't given pocket money, as were my friends. And as a bolshy, overconfident 13-year-old, I was like, well, bugger you, I'm going to go get it myself. So I went off and got 2 jobs. And that sparked the feeling of independence, bringing in my own cash, and I guess that had a significant part to play in my whole journey of becoming an entrepreneur.
When you were growing up, you obviously had exposure with your father's business and their fitting out of the interiors of planes. Did that spark your interest with business as well? Did he teach you the ropes of business and all that?
So that actually wasn't my dad's business. He had another business opposite that. And at 19, when I had traveled for 6 months and I didn't know what to do, he decided to buy the business for me. So he just threw me in the deep end. And no, he gave me no guidance.
But maybe that's quite good that you were thrown in the deep end because you got to learn the ropes of how the business operated and everything.
So, yes, so I think my dad always absolutely believed in my abilities. He was a man of few words, and it's curious to me that I obviously felt that and he resonated that. So when he bought it, there wasn't like, what have you just done? I can't do this. So I haven't grown up with an I can't do this attitude, and maybe witnessing my dad, he was an entrepreneur as well. So he had his own construction company. And then he built this huge hangar at Lanseria Airport and kind of got more into the aviation side, which was his passion and his love. So maybe just witnessing him just get on and work hard was what I absorbed, as a child. And so I was like, okay, let's do this then. There was nothing else better to do. And it was fun. It was great being on the airfield. I was the youngest sort of person there working and built some lovely friendships. And, it was a lovely job to do, so to speak, for a while until I found the next best thing.
And obviously the next best thing would obviously be Oryx Desert Salt. So right at the beginning, before Oryx Desert Salt came about, what is the story building up to starting that business?
Okay, so actually it was discovering an uninhabited island on Lake Malawi, and heading off to live on an uninhabited island was the next best thing to going to a job every day, right?
Okay.
So I found a replacement and headed off to Lake Malawi. Then my first experience of unaligned business partners and business partners that had ulterior motives. And so essentially lost that business. Ended up walking away. At 24, didn't know how to handle it actually, and didn't have the conviction to stand up for our rights. And so my partner and I started a beach bar restaurant, which was a lot of fun, but too much fun. And then traveled to London for a while. And my next big project really was arriving in Orange Farm Township and doing volunteer work. And then kind of very curious as to how to do upliftment, but on a very genuine, authentic way. So the corporates love building buildings that end up usually empty. And so I started an NGO called 20,000 Drums, Transformation Through Celebration. So it was taking drumming into rural schools and giving the children an experience of incredible pure joy, which a lot of them hadn't experienced because they were headed households. That's a mouthful. Their parents had passed and they now had siblings that they needed to look after. There was not a lot of joy. And the idea was also that incredible sort of coherence and resonance that happens when 500 or 1,000 kids all drum and sync with one another. Nice. Had intentioned to be one of the opening ceremonies of the World Cup soccer, but
2010.
In 2010. But the beautiful person that I worked with in Department of Arts and Culture, her funding got cut and so didn't manage. But we did workshop in the end 30,000 children around the country. So that was that little project. In that time, I had traveled to Namibia and had an incredible experience with some friends. And that was when I had my experience of a face-to-face encounter with an Oryx gazelle, or a gemsbok, as we most people know. Oryx is the Latin name. Okay. And I walked 120 kilometers through the Namib Desert, and I was also sitting on top of a sand dune in Sources Flay when two bull oryx, one was chasing the other, ended up running up the hill and skidding to a stop because I was sitting in its pathway. Fortunately, I was sitting with a friend and we had an umbrella, so we didn't look threatening. We just looked like a strange object. And then they ran off as friends. But that moment, which was timeless, I don't know how long it was actually, but being face to face and that incredible masked animal, when I wanted to create a brand 7 years later, was the image that came to mind when I was sort of, okay, so what logo, what's the name going to be? And immediately that was the symbol that arrived.
Wow. Okay, so that was during that time in 2010. So when you mentioned 7 years later, so initially when you were starting the business, it technically didn't have a name yet or a brand or anything yet. So how did...
So actually I was pregnant when I introduced a friend to the father of my child, who was from Europe. And he saw the opportunity of taking the salt over to Denmark. So I supported him for a couple of years and went to live overseas, also to see if I could make the marriage successful, if he could sort of step up and do what you're supposed to do as now a father and a husband. Yeah. That didn't happen. And I ended up leaving a note on the table and coming back. But I had already created the Oryx Desert Salt brand. And so arrived back, moved into a little wooden Wendy house in the corner of a friend's garden. I sold my house and I bought 34 tons of salt. And that was how I started.
Wow. So, and then how did you source the salt? How did you know it was authentic? How did you know it was good quality? Obviously you just bought 34 tons of salt, but did you have a previous experience with that salt or?
So yes, so I had actually been working with it for a couple of years, exporting it to Europe. And the colleague friend that I was buying, who was an agent for the salt, he was selling it in bulk to Germany and didn't want to create a product. He thought it was going to be too much hard work, and that there weren't enough people in South Africa, that there wasn't a big enough market in South Africa. So when before I even returned to South Africa, I had said that I wanted to create a product. And he had been looking for a food product with a spiritual quality.
Okay.
And salt is in the Bible 49 times. It's in every culture and every religion. And he ended up meeting the daughter of the salt pan. And he went up to the salt pan in the beautiful Kalahari Desert and knew that it was an incredible quality because of the remote, pristine area that it comes from. And so he started selling it in bulk. But I needed to do something. So in 2010, there was also the financial crash. And so there wasn't money for feel-good, happy, spiritual upliftment projects. And so I was also, looking for something else to do. And so it all aligned.
So when you talk about salt, obviously from the pan, you talk about the authenticity of it. How do you test the authenticity of salt in terms of like when you're getting it from the source in the Kalahari from the pan? How do you gauge if it's good quality or not? It's obviously with lots of different products, there are different standards that would guide quality. How did you determine that quality was excellent?
So it's an interesting particular place because the underground aquifer where the salt is sourced is oversaturated. And so in summer, it crystallizes in only 4 weeks in a lunar cycle, which is kind of unheard of in the salt industry. I would imagine one of the only other places would be the Dead Sea, which is also oversaturated. Sea salt is 13 to 20% saturation, so it takes a while. So one's got to keep pouring up sea water into beds, and it has to sort of evaporate, and then they pour more and more until it becomes saturated, because it's only then that it will crystallize. Whereas our salt is already saturated and so crystallizes very quickly. And because it is 250 kilometers north of Uppington, there's no industry, there's no air pollution really, there's no contamination, there's no plastic. So obviously for thousands of years we've got our salt source has been the oceans, but the oceans are not what they were 50 and 100 and 1,000 years ago. They are very sadly, shockingly contaminated now. And the salt from the ocean, so sea salt, has been tested to contain nano and microplastics. And I was sharing with you earlier around homeopathy. So homeopathic remedies is the essence or the vibration of something. And what has been dumped in the oceans continually, fertilizers, glyphosate from any farmlands. You've got sewage. The cruise liners dump 1 billion tons of sewage into the oceans every single year. Industrial factories, they sometimes dump barrels of waste. In the English Channel, they've recently found barrels of radioactive waste that have now rusted and are leaking. So, to then go and build up the saturation of seawater that has contains a myriad of things, and then put that on your food, thank you, no thank you. And in fact, I met a marine biologist in the USA, and he creates a product from oysters. He's based in Ireland, and he decided to test his oysters, and he discovered contraceptives and opioids. So if you think 360 million Americans alone, how many of them are on a contraceptive, an antidepressant, some allopathic medication, if not one, maybe 20, and some of that you pee out, it goes through your kidneys, it ends up in the rivers and ends up in the oceans.
Wow. So, obviously a big thing for you in line with that would be not only the sourcing of it sustainably, but also like from a longevity point of view. Obviously the pan, does it create an infinite amount of salt? How does it work practically speaking?
So there are 3 subterranean rivers that are constantly flowing into the underground aquifer. And the area is sodium chloride salt dense. So sodium chloride is if the minerals have been stripped out. Salt really is sodium chloride, and a high percentage, 97%, plus moisture and 65 to 85 minerals, depending whether you are quantifying 0.001 of a trace element, if that's what it contains. It's a very tricky analysis, and I've been contacting 15, 20 different labs to try and get a full analysis, and I still haven't managed to do so. So we have had it tested originally, and there were 65 minerals and trace elements. So so the source of Oryx is a very pure, untouched source with all of the minerals and trace elements. So it's actually only table salt that has been demineralized, highly processed, heated. And the demineralizing is them taking out the impurities, which is so ridiculous, really. And then they add one of several different anti-caking or free flow chemicals. So aluminium silicate. Aluminium is not good for our bodies, and the free flow anti-caking agent is aluminium silicate, one of them. So it stops salt from absorbing moisture, and salt is naturally hygroscopic. You would have a small plate with table salt and a small plate with ground Oryx Desert Salt in. Oryx would be wet after a couple of days, and the table salt will stay dry forever. And so it's essential for our bodies in order for us to stay hydrated. And you mentioned earlier about not being dehydrated. So we should never get to dehydration. We should always be hydrated. And we do that by putting a pinch or a couple of grinds of Oryx Desert Salt into our drinking water, which turns it into an electrolyte. So the body struggles with just absorbing water because it needs to be in a particular ratio of minerals. So if it's just water, it can flush your kidneys, but the body actually has to then leach out into the water to bring it back in again, because it needs to, there's an osmosis that happens. So just by putting a few grinds in your drinking water, turns it into an electrolyte, and that helps to stay hydrated.
Wow. So understanding the purity of the product itself, how do you... Obviously, one of the primary ways in which you differentiate yourself from your competitors would be the purity of the salt itself and also the source of it. But if people go to the shelf and they look at all the salts, they, on face value, they all look the same. Like technically from a packaging point of view. So how do you, from an Oryx point of view, through the power of storytelling and through the power of information, how have you perhaps made your customer base more aware of not only the health benefits, but also just the fact that you're putting this into your body over the long term, that it's actually good for you? Because anything can be sold as being good for you, but how are you getting that out to your customers?
It's hard work.
I'm sure.
It takes people like you offering giving me an opportunity to share to the people that trust you.
For sure.
So we are very trusting, and it's very sad that we've got to a place in time that most of the food on a supermarket shelf is actually not food. It's a bunch of chemicals. How does milk stay in a package, in a box, on the shelf indefinitely and not go off? There has to be something wrong, So it is just through education, and it's a lovely place now that Oryx has reached, that I've reached 15 years later, where there is this general movement and awareness around the importance of salt, because the body needs it even to think properly. So at the end of the day, that sort of 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock slump where you really would love to just curl up on the couch and have a nap and not push through the last hour, it's fascinating to even do the test, is grind Oryx into your drinking water and enough that it's slightly salty that you can taste it, and drink that. And by the way, everyone, there is Oryx salt in my water, by the way. And suddenly there's this just little lift. It takes off that exhaustion edge. So everyone can test it for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then obviously, I mean, people looking for Oryx Desert Salt, you can buy it online. You'd Woolworths, Pick and Pay, and then obviously you're in Whole Foods in the US as well. So one of your biggest selling points is the sustainability of it. But in terms of accessibility of the product, what are the other channels through which people can obtain, obviously, Oryx Desert Salt?
So we're just launching in Checkers GP. So it will be on shelf in 3 weeks, which is very exciting. And yeah, that's my mission. That's my journey, is to make it as accessible globally as I possibly can. And that's a whole nother challenge in itself. Finding the right distributors, finding switched on buyers who understand the story, getting a moment in front of the buyers in order to tell the story. So yeah, this is what my mission is, my challenge.
And I mean, if you take a big retailer like a Whole Foods in the US, why would they not just source? Why would they specifically want to source it from South Africa? I mean, there's huge cost implications. I mean, what was so compelling about your story to them?
I mean, the beautiful original buyer at Whole Foods, it was that perfect moment in time where the buyer was very switched on around health. He understood the importance of salt. And now he's offering desert salt on his shelf versus sea salt that has been tested polluted. Himalayan salt that's created the global gourmet category, but is dynamited in a non-renewable resource. Plus, we've done one other little trick, a hack. So there's even a little story inside, which says to you that this is a ceramic mechanism, grinding mechanism. It doesn't grind plastic into your food, and it's at least 20 times refillable. So pretty much all other grinders on shelf are plastic, which means that you grind plastic into your food, and then you throw it away, and you go buy another one, and you grind more plastic. So so currently it has a refill, reuse, real value sticker on the top. That's going to change to refill, not landfill. And on my flight this morning, I did a calculation of how many bottles and grinder heads we saved from landfill last year. I don't have the, I think it was 1,216,000 bottles and heads that didn't end up in landfill, which I think would be more or less 18 20-foot containers. It's a lot of, it's a lot of product that people are now just refilling. And so that's been a big part of my storytelling as well.
Wow.
Is please don't throw our product away. Please only buy our grinder once, which is very counterintuitive for business.
Yes.
Most businesses want you to buy more of. And yes, I'd love you to buy another grinder and gift it to a friend, but you don't need 2 or 3 or 5 in your kitchen. You only need one, and then you buy the refills.
So obviously, I mean, if you go to Woolworths or Checkers or Pick and Pay, you just take this off and you can refill it accordingly. And the refills are easily accessible, and you can just use the same grinder
Absolutely.
every time.
Yeah. And we printed the logo onto the bottle because it lasts for so long. You don't want a label that ends up getting dirty and peeling and scratching and looking manky. So the logo will last many, many, many years.
And it's just, I mean, obviously on a side note, we're busy talking about Oryx Desert Salt, but I mean, the black pepper is obviously also available as a little pigeon pear here. That's obviously sustainably sourced and locally sourced as well in South Africa. Where does that come from?
Yeah,
Where does that come from?
not from South Africa. So currently we're sourcing from Madagascar, and sometimes we blend in Vietnam pepper, depending on whether Madagascar has had a harvest and the pepper is available. And I have somebody in Zimbabwe who has managed to revive an old pepper forest. So I'm very excited that in 6 months to a year we'll be sourcing from a community in Zimbabwe.
Wow. And is it all getting packaged in Cape Town and then distributed and shipped from Cape Town to the US. Are you in any other countries at this point other than the US?
We supply about 21, 23 countries, ad hoc. So they're not, we're just busy resupplying Saudi Arabia, and it's taken them sort of 18 months since our last order. Taiwan is quite frequent, UK, but Czech Republic, Switzerland, Qatar, UAE, there are many, Namibia, obviously. So yeah, many countries that it's got out to.
And how many stores are your products in at this point in time? I saw a number about like 3,000 or something along those
Or
lines.
at least, I would say, in South Africa.
Yes, South Africa.
Yeah, delis, gourmet shops, all of the retailers. I would say at least 3,000.
Incredible. So in terms of, obviously from a more business focused point of view, I mean, you have the dynamics of your business that are running every day, but you also have your personal life running alongside of it. Do you have any, on a more personal note, do you have any like tips or tricks or habits that you like to bring into your daily routine that really helps you build a business like this?
I mean, I think any entrepreneur, and I'm sure you would attest to this, there are lots of challenges. And I mean, firstly, I think anyone who's chosen the entrepreneur path has some courage and self-confidence that we need to keep relying on, as also a little bit of nutsness, I would say. And then just lots of courage and resilience, just showing up every day and taking care of ourselves. Because I think we do work harder than arriving at a job and then closing your laptop at 5 and driving home and what have you. We barely close up our computers at 5 o'clock. And so, yeah, I mean, I generally try and take some quiet time in the morning and focus on my breath. Last year I had a sort of mini burnout around the beginning of March, which was a little bit scary at the time. And I realized it's often not safe in my head. It's just too busy. So I literally try and put attention on my heart so that I can endeavor to really run my business from the heart, which doesn't always happen. I run hard, I drive hard, and I'm very impatient. So I don't think I'm always the easiest person to deal with. But the taking care, I mean, I drink very little alcohol. My food is very curated. I don't eat anything out of tins. My food is good quality vegetables and meat, actually. So yeah, and I think taking time in nature, taking time off. I had a really beautiful 2.5-week holiday in Cambodia this year, and that was because I didn't have a holiday the last 2 years, and I knew how it affected me, and just made a conscious choice that wasn't going to happen again.
Do you find understanding how salt is sourced and the dynamics of how you source your product, do you think it's made you a lot more aware of your health and the overall nature of how you operate every day?
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I feel like it actually is very helpful being in a business where you have this mindset, or perhaps you're being influenced by the fact that because the product is coming from a sustainable source and it's good for you, it naturally plays into other parts of your life.
Absolutely. And I honestly believe that everyone who starts making a conscious choice about which salt they're choosing, which is the smallest ingredient in any meal, that same questioning or awareness will follow through into the other products that they choose to put into their bodies. And I think COVID was an incredible blessing for the planet because it woke people up to, do you want to be sick or do you want to be healthy? And taking back, and obviously with the internet, all of the, there's a community of people that I discovered 5 years ago called the biohackers, but it's the whole wellness, longevity, health optimization community that is, I think health and wellness is one of the biggest growing sectors outside of tech and AI, obviously. And and, becoming more sovereign and making choices around how we take care of ourselves and look after ourselves. And I think it was Hippocrates who said, you are what you eat. And that's become true and is becoming truer and truer.
Wow. Sure. And I mean, earlier you mentioned when you were 24 years old that business in, I think it was on Lake Malawi, that obviously imploded. If you had to go back and speak to your 24-year-old self, I mean, what would you do differently if you had to kind of start from that point again, understanding what you've built now? What advice would you give to your younger self if a younger person is listening to this? How would that advice perhaps shape your younger self today?
So what's interesting is that my health journey started as I moved to Lake Malawi. I was introduced to a book around breath work and food. And I started fasting then, doing 10-day water fasts. So that's always been has been a part of my journey for a long time. Which I think in itself kind of brings in a resilience where you choose to abstain for something, for a food specifically, for a long period of time. And so I think the hardest part, and it was so interesting, I ended up meeting the third business partner only a week ago for the first time since that happened in 94, so 30 years ago. And it was a beautiful and a hard meeting. I mean, I ended up crying. I ended up sobbing at the end of it because I lost something really beautiful. I lost this incredible uninhabited island. So, and at the same time, I'm really aware that not having the conviction then to stand up for my island, there've been two situations in Oryx Desert Salt journey where I've had to stand up for the business. And so my first business partner, after a year, no longer wanted to be a partner. And that sort of inspired and sparked my networking. But I had such a deep determination and conviction that this is what I wanted to do. So it's almost like the previous failure was a gift to have it for later on. So I guess it's just having that faith that we are where we are because we were meant to be here. And the hard lessons along the way. We're not here to have a rosy time, we're here to grow. And I really do believe we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And the human experience is a tough one. Indeed. It's not easy and pretty. Yeah. But it's been an incredible journey growing Oryx because I've watched myself grow. 5 years ago, I wouldn't be sitting here in the way that I am today. And now I even enjoy being up on stage with 300 people and sharing my journey and the Oryx journey. So it's my personal vehicle for growth, as well as income, as well as this, almost this passion and this belief that this is my soul's journey to get this product that I've been kind of chosen, weirdly, to get the salt out to the world. Like Oryx feels like it's got its own soul in a way, and I've kind of, been guided to it. And that was because of that experience on the salt pad, on the sand dune, where the Oryx literally skidded in my path in a 30,000 square kilometer desert. So yeah, I think it's just having that faith. Faith has been one of my pillars to build the business. That and gratitude. I give thanks a lot for many things along the way, and having very clear, focused intention, knowing where I want to go to. And those three seem to just support this crazy ambition that I have.
That's absolutely incredible. I mean, I love that. So, and in line with that, obviously, a lot of people perhaps look at different stories and different inspirations, like some people look at Steve Jobs, or some people look at a variety of different people that would obviously inspire them. Are there certain quotes or stories anecdotally that once you've read them, you're kind of always reminded of them in your own journey?
I think there are two specifically. The first one, so in the very beginning of Oryx, there wasn't podcasts and the internet as we know it. So I signed up to the Real Entrepreneur organization, and I would get mailed CDs.
Oh, wow.
And I think it was Brian Tracy who said that getting a business off the ground is like getting a jumbo jet into the air. Like, you have to be on full power to get off the runway and to get up off the fence at the end of the runway and to get to altitude. Because if you don't, you will crash. So that kind of just allowed me to just keep my foot on the pedal on, kind of fifth gear, which I don't seem to have managed to get down from. But I also don't feel like I've reached altitude yet. And the other one was I did an incredible 3-day workshop with Serdar, which is a sort of corporate governance, and it taught me so much. And there was also a talk by Ronnie Mule, who was one of first South Africans to Mount Everest. And he said that if you want to Mount Everest, one, you've got to know that I want to get to the top of the mountain. And so everything that you do is aligned towards achieving that. The training that you do, all of the equipment that you need to get there. And I think that goes, it's the same for any business. You've got to really know what it is that you want to achieve and what your end goal is, so that you just keep realigning. So yeah, I would say those two have been the most significant, or the ones that come to mind.
Wonderful. And then, have you got any final words of wisdom that you would like to leave with our listeners?
So we're all just winging it, I think.
That is true.
I knew nothing about packaging or product or, expanding into global markets. But I have a deep, deep belief in the power of salt for our health. And for upgrading us. We are actually electromagnetic beings, and we need salt to thrive, not just to survive. In fact, you can't live without salt. You'll actually eventually go into a coma and die if you abstain from all salt in your food. So it just is this deep passion to get it out, and I guess do something that you really believe in. Your business, your service, your product needs to be the absolute best that you can, with integrity, not cutting corners, so that you can stand proud always and share it or promote it with such conviction. And that just makes it easier. Whereas if you kind of cutting corners, then that would be sitting as a little gremlin on your shelf. Oh, really? Whereas, we have a little travel shaker, which is now cardboard. And it used to be plastic. And I prefer the plastic ones. It's got a screw-on lid. But after putting 500,000 of them into the world, I was feeling really uncomfortable because there's so much plastic in the world, but I was just adding to it. So I know the cardboard ones are not as fabulous, but they can go into the recycle, go into the organic. They can be, literally they just disintegrate. And so, yeah, just really attention to detail in everything that you do.
Wow. Well, Samantha, I really, really appreciate your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and obviously hear your story and learn more about salt. It's been an eye-opening experience personally. I personally was not aware that salt had so many health benefits and that it was just so essential to, and also the quality of the salt and where it's sourced from. Oftentimes the customer doesn't necessarily have the insight into where it's coming from. You kind of just believe that it's saying it be sourced, and you hope that it is.
Or you don't think about it.
Or you don't even think about it. You just put salt on your food and off you go again, because you don't actually have time to think about. But if you know that the supplier has your best interest at heart in that sense, knowing that they sourcing the salt ethically and it's environmentally friendly and that it actually is good for the planet long term. It actually takes a lot of thinking off our shoulders, technically speaking. So I really, really appreciate your time, and it's been amazing. So thank you so much.
And thank you too.
Thank you.